In my series on Paulo Freire's Pedagogy of the Oppressed, this is my 21st conversation on Chapter 4. We have almost finished the book, and today I'll be talking about the third most important attribute of the dialogic mode of resistance in revolutionary praxis, and that is organization. So let's begin. Note that we've already covered two important aspects of the dialogical praxis of revolution, and we started with cooperation and then we did unity for liberation. We discussed the two, and today we'll be discussing organization. I'll be reading from page 175 to top of 179, and as always, I'll first read and then come back and talk about it. So let's read the first part of this section on organization. In the theory of anti-dialogical action, manipulation is indispensable to conquest and domination. In the dialogical theory of action, the organization of the people presents the antagonistic opposite of this manipulation. Organization is not only directly linked to unity, but it is a natural development of that unity. Accordingly, the leader's pursuit of unity is necessarily also an attempt to organize the people, requiring witness to the fact that the struggle for liberation is a common task. This constant, humble, and courageous witness emerging from cooperation in a shared effort, the liberation of women and men, avoids the danger of anti-dialogical control. The form of witness may vary depending on the historical conditions of any society. Witness itself, however, is an indispensable element of revolutionary action. In order to determine the what and how of that witness, it is therefore essential to have an increasingly critical knowledge of the current historical context, the view of the world held by the people, the principal contradiction of society, and the principal aspect of that contradiction. Since these dimensions of witness are historical, dialogical, and therefore dialectical, witness cannot simply import them from other contexts without previously analyzing its own. To do otherwise is to absolutize and mythologize the relative. Alienation then becomes unavoidable. Witness in the dialogical theory of action is one of the principal expressions of the cultural and educational character of the revolution. The essential elements of witness, which do not vary historically, include consistency between words and actions, boldness, which urges the witness to confront existence as a permanent risk, radicalization, not sectarianism, leading both the witness and the ones receiving that witness to increasing action, courage to love, which far from being accommodation to an unjust world is rather the transformation of that world in behalf of the increasing liberation of humankind, and faith in the people, since it is to them that witness is made. Although witness to people, because of their dialectical relations with the dominant elites, also affects the latter, who respond to that witness in their customary way. All authentic, that is critical, witness involves the daring to run risks, including the possibility that the leaders will not always win the immediate adherence of the people. Witness which has not borne fruit at a certain moment and under certain conditions is not thereby rendered incapable of bearing fruit tomorrow. Since witness is not an abstract gesture, but an action, a confrontation with the world and with people, it is not static. It is a dynamic element which becomes part of the societal context in which it occurred. From that moment, it does not cease to affect the context. So it becomes clear in these passages that I just read that Freire is now moving on to explaining how the revolutionary praxis or movement for change will be organized. Right? What will be the structuring of its organization? After all, any movement must have a cadre of leaders and the people. And throughout the book, we have been learning that the process isn't that the leaders come somehow and try to convince the people, come join us, we'll bring a revolution and then we'll bring the change. No, the leadership develops from amongst the people. People educate the leaders and vice versa, and so the relationship is dialogical. So that's why we started with cooperation amongst the people as one of the core elements of dialogical resistance, right, in opposition to anti-dialogical praxis. Then we came to unity for liberation, that people must unite, and leaders and people together must build that unity. Now we are going into the organizational aspects of this revolutionary movement. Will it be top-down? Will leaders dictate whatever they want to accomplish? So that's where we are going with this. So what I just read, Freire is offering this organizational thematics or this way of organizing in opposition to manipulation, which the oppressor class uses to manipulate the people, and most of it depends on sloganeering, right, and power. This relationship between the people and their leaders, he equates it to bearing witness. Now we have worked towards that bearing witness because you cannot witness something unless you understand it. That's why in chapter 3 we learned how to develop a curriculum, how to engage with the people, how to let them inform what their worldview is, then how to help them with their cooperation to see the world and analyze it objectively. We develop the critical consciousness. We are not dealing with people who can be misled by slogans. So this witness has certain essential core elements that he discusses and describes in this section. But these are the things that he talked about in chapter 3 and in chapter 2. So what are those? So the first one, essential element of bearing witness, leader and the people together, is consistency. That whatever the leaders say, their words must correspond to their actions. It can't just be empty sloganeering. Boldness, right? Boldness of action, but boldness also to take risks along with the people in the cause of the revolution. Radicalization. Now, radicalization in Freire, of course, is something completely different, right? It's not sectarianism. It's not I'm a leftist, you're a rightist. Radicalization involves critical thinking and constant challenge to the dominant order. I have a separate conversation on radicalization, which you can obviously go to for further explanation. Courage to love. Now this is important. Remember, love was an essential ingredient of dialogue. So courage to love. What he says is courage to love, which far from being accommodation to an unjust world, is rather the transformation of that world in behalf of increasing liberation of humankind. So courage to love the world, but also to love the people. And then finally, faith in the people. Not assuming that leaders must do all the thinking and they must do everything. No, you have to have faith in the people and leadership united as equals will bring about the change. Now what he also cautions in this section that I just read is that Your first attempt may not succeed, it might fail, but that doesn't mean that the entire movement is a failure. It might bear fruit later, right? So these are some of the things to keep in mind about the passage that I just read, because he gives us briefly the essential elements of revolutionary praxis and what constitutes bearing witness, which is an important part of developing organization. So let's read a little more and then I'll come and talk about it. In anti-dialogical action, manipulation anesthetizes the people and facilitates their domination. In dialogical action, manipulation is superseded by authentic organization. In anti-dialogical action, manipulation serves the ends of conquest. In dialogical action, daring and loving witness serve the ends of organization. For the dominant elites, organization means organizing themselves. For the revolutionary leaders, organization means organizing themselves with the people. In the first event, the dominant elite increasingly structures its power so that it can more efficiently dominate and depersonalize. In the second, organization only corresponds to its nature and objective if in itself it constitutes the practice of freedom. Accordingly, the discipline necessary to any organization must not be confused with regimentation. It is quite true that without leadership, discipline, determination, and objectives, without tasks to fulfill and accounts to be rendered, an organization cannot survive, and revolutionary action is thereby diluted. This fact, however, can never justify treating the people as things to be used. The people are already depersonalized by oppression. If the revolutionary leaders manipulate them instead of working towards their consensus, the very objective of organization, that is liberation, is thereby negated. Organizing the people is the process in which the revolutionary leaders, who are also prevented from saying their own word, initiate the experience of learning how to name the word. This is true learning experience and therefore dialogical. So it is that the leaders cannot say their word alone, they must say it with the people. Leaders who do not act dialogically but insist on imposing their decisions do not organize the people. They manipulate them. They do not liberate, nor are they liberated. They oppress. The fact that leaders who organize the people do not have the right to arbitrarily impose their word does not mean that they must therefore take a liberalist position which would encourage license among the people who are accustomed to oppression. The dialogical theory of action opposes both authoritarianism and license and thereby affirms authority and freedom. There is no freedom without authority, but there is also no authority without freedom. All freedom contains the possibility that under special circumstances and at different existential levels, it may become authority. Freedom and authority cannot be isolated, but must be considered in relationship to each other. Authentic authority is not affirmed as such by a mere transfer of power, but through delegation or in sympathetic adherence. If authority is merely transferred from one group to another or is imposed upon the majority, it degenerates into authoritarianism. Authority can avoid conflict with freedom only if it is freedom become authority. Hypertrophy of the one provokes atrophy of the other, just as authority cannot exist without freedom, and vice versa, authoritarianism cannot exist without denying freedom, nor license without denying authority. In the theory of dialogical action, organization requires authority, so it cannot be authoritarian. It requires freedom, so it cannot be licentious. Organization is rather a highly educational process in which leaders and people together experience true authority and freedom, which they then seek to establish in society by transforming the reality which mediates them. Freire again is teaching us about the extremes of any given revolutionary movement or organization. So on one end of it is authoritarianism, and the other end is licentiousness. How to balance in a way that the leaders do not become authoritarian and the people do not take license and do whatever they want. So to balance these two extremes, he would then talk about authority and freedom. At no point during the revolutionary movement the leaders can assume that they have the power to dictate whatever they want. That would be authoritarianism. But people at the same time cannot just assume that it's a free-for-all. So they have to be responsible in the process, give their consent to their leaders, but with responsibility. Freedom then is a responsible freedom. So what we learn then is that leadership here needs to be what he calls authentic. Authentic in a sense that it has to come from the willing consent of the people. People that we are talking about are not necessarily people who are being manipulated by slogans. These are the people who have gone through the revolutionary praxis, education, critical thinking to develop a conscientia, right? What is conscientia? Becoming aware of the economic and political machinations of the world in which we live, and then challenging to change it. So we are talking about leaders who do not use authority over people, but who get that authority from the people. And a people who do not think that revolutionary movement is a free-for-all, but who respect the authority that they themselves have given to their leadership. Now, this is really an important, insightful part of Freire's book, because the biggest problem in populist revolutions or populist uprisings is the balance of organization. Who is controlling what? Is it people just burning things and running around? Or is it a group of leaders who have led people to believe that come with us and we'll change the world? So what he is trying to teach us to safeguard against is a kind of authoritarianism where the leaders come together, they have, their own people around them and they try to control the people, which has happened in several revolutions in our own lifetime. Or people taking it upon themselves to become the authority itself and dictating terms and destroying things. Licentiousness, right? So what he's balancing is people having been educated, having educated themselves, having educated the leaders. We've gone through the process of education, giving their willing consent to the leaders. But that consent is not irrevocable, right? It can be revoked if the leaders fail the people. And the leaders not manipulating the people, because that's what the oppressors do, but rather working with the people, so that it neither becomes authoritarianism, where a top dictates what's going on and what is permissible and what is not, nor does it become licentiousness, where it's a free-for-all. So organization then will be with the willing consent of the people. Leaders will learn from the people. People will train themselves and train the leaders, and then they will work towards a life-giving, revolutionary change with the love of the world and love of the people as guiding principles of that revolutionary praxis. So roughly this is what I get from today's reading. This is, as you know, the final part of the book. Now remember, we've gotten to these dialogical principles of resistance and social change and political change, not necessarily in this fourth chapter, but Freire has taught us how to educate ourselves, how to first liberate the consciousness of ourselves and our people, how to develop a curriculum, because it is an educational project. It is a didactical project, but it's a dialogic didactical project and not the banking system. We have come to this point after learning how to educate ourselves and how to educate the people, after discussing the four aspects of anti-dialogical mode of controlling the people, and he's offering these four in opposition to what the dominant group does. So we have so far covered cooperation, unity for liberation, and today I've touched upon organization. That's all for today. I will move on next to the final determinant, final essential element of the dialogical mode of resistance, and then we would have ended the book. Thank you so much for your time. I hope this is useful to you. Let me know what you think. I'll be back with more. Until then, peace and love.